During her blistering takedown of Donald Trump's psychotic new border czar, liberal Fox News commentator Jessica Tarlov exposed the fact that Donald Trump's so-called mandate is much more fragile than MAGA Republicans and her four MAGA co-hosts would have you believe. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, I got a clip to show you here because it's been a minute since we've checked in with Jessica Tarlov, the Fox News liberal who, in my estimation, has the hardest job in legacy and mainstream media. And that job probably got considerably harder in the aftermath of Donald Trump's disastrous victory in the 2024 election, right? Can you imagine the kind of crap she's going to have to put up with for the next 4 years, the lies, the dishonesty, the bad faith framing, Trump taking credit for legislation and accomplishments that he inherited from President Biden? I imagine her blood pressure is probably going to be through the roof. Godspeed, Jessica, if you're watching. But during a recent takedown, she not only stuck it to Tom Homan, who is a Project 2025 contributor. He is a former acting director for ICE. He is a hardliner to the umpteenth degree on immigration and mass deportation. This guy is a psychopath. And as good as that was, she also made a really, really good point that I think a lot of people, myself included, tend to overlook about Donald Trump's so-called mandate in terms of government. Let's watch the clip and then we'll unpack it together.
I do want to say something, though, about Tom Homan. So for everyone who said Trump doesn't know what Project 2025 is, he just put a key contributor in charge of this. And Tom Homan was interviewed on 60 Minutes, and he was asked, is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families? And he said, of course there is. Families can be deported together. He also said that it didn't mean if someone was coming to be, quote unquote, rounded up and grandma was in the house and she's undocumented, that it didn't necessarily mean that grandma wouldn't be taken to. And you can say Donald Trump has a mandate till you're blue in the face. Taking grandma is not what people were voting for. They were voting for criminals to be kicked out of this country. I do want to say something.
So she mentions the mandate, and that's really the point of this. That's really the crux of this particular video. Obviously, everything she said about Tom Homan was true. We talked about it in our video about Tom Homan. We're going to have to do another video about Tom Homan because since he has been named Donald Trump's border czar, he has said increasingly unhinged things, particularly about the military. But that's a topic for a separate video. But the point is, this idea that Donald Trump has a mandate and that this is a landslide election. And quite frankly, I have also been imprecise at times referring to this as a landslide election when in fact it wasn't. And again, before we get into the meat and the potatoes of the mandate, we have to evaluate whether or not this election was a landslide, because you'll find that these ideas are correlated. Donald Trump won the popular vote. He won the electoral college. His party is taking control of the Senate. He swept all 7 battleground states. He's probably going to have the House of Representatives. That sure seems, if you squint at it, like a landslide, which in turn confers a mandate. MSNBC commentator Lawrence O'Donnell actually takes issue with that. He makes a pretty good argument that even though a lot of people are positioning this as a landslide, and certainly Trump and MAGA Republicans are, it's actually not.
To arrive on time to be counted is tomorrow night. Ballots received in the mail tomorrow will be counted in California. So there are literally millions of ballots yet to be counted in this country, including in the state of Pennsylvania, where thousands of votes remain to be counted to determine the balance of the United States Senate. Republicans will probably have 52 senators next year, or 53 if Republicans win the Pennsylvania Senate election. The Democrats will probably have 47 members of the Senate, or 48 if Democrat Bob Casey wins the Pennsylvania Senate race. We still don't know which party will control the House of Representatives, but we do know that it will be very close. As of tonight, Republicans have 214 seats in the House and Democrats have 205 seats in the House, according to NBC News, with 16 remaining to be decided. In the presidential vote, Donald Trump currently has 50.2% of the vote to Kamala Harris's 48.1% of the vote. But that margin will probably narrow after all the California votes are finally counted. And it is possible that Kamala Harris will end up with only a 1% of the vote less than Donald Trump, a 1% gap. Right now, she's at 2% less than Donald Trump. If you hear anyone calling this election a landslide, please stop listening to that person about elections, at least. We have seen
He's right. He's right. This is not a landslide election. I understand why people might phrase it that way when they just squint at the results, but the truth is it's not. Certainly not compared to the landslide victories of President Reagan or President Obama. And because it's not a landslide, we have to question whether or not there's a mandate. And if there is a mandate, what does it look like? So the LA Times and some other publications have written about this. And again, I find it really interesting. Victorious Republicans are once again falling for the mandate trap. This is from the LA Times. Now, I still think the idea of mandates are always conceptually flawed and often ridiculous. The only relevant constitutional mandate Donald Trump enjoys is the mandate to be sworn in as president. Think about it this way. Trump's coalition together contains factions that disagree with one another on many things. Assume the self-described Republicans are Trump voters. According to the exit polls, about a third of voters who support legal abortion voted for Trump, while 91% of those who think it should be illegal voted for him. There are similar divides over support for Israel, mass deportation of immigrants, that's the big one, going back to what Jessica Tarlov was talking about, and other issues. Heck, 12% of voters who think his views are, quote, too extreme, nonetheless voted for him. 5% of the people who would feel, quote, concerned or scared if he were elected still backed him at the polls. In short, whatever Trump believes his mandate is, at least some of the people who voted for him will have different ideas. Save for dealing with inflation and righting the economy, there's very little that he can do that won't result in some people saying, quote, this isn't what I voted for. Even if you believe in mandates, how big could Trump's be, given that it's tied as the 44th best showing ever in the Electoral College? None of this is unique to Trump. Presidential electoral coalitions have always had internal contradictions. FDR had everyone from progressive blacks and Jews to Dixiecrats and Klansmen in his column. Many people seem to think that politics is what happens during elections, but politics never stops. Once elected, the venue for politics changes. Presidents believe, understandably, that they were elected to do what they campaigned on. The challenge is that Congress and state governments are full of people who won an election too, and they have their own ideas about what their mandate is. Post-election politics is dealing with that reality. I'll also point out that there are many people who split ticket voted, who voted for Donald Trump at the top of the ticket because of this anti-incumbency surge, the sentiment which is sweeping the planet. I mean, out of the last 10 major elections in developed democracies, the incumbent party suffered either outright defeat or reduction. They were either ousted outright, or in the case of the government in India, the supermajority shrank, right? So there wasn't like an outright overturning of power, but the incumbent party suffered defeat. In the United Kingdom, we saw a sweeping repudiation of the Conservative Party, which had been in power for like 16 years, right? And so it's not just exclusive to the United States, right? So a lot of people voted for Trump because he's not the incumbent president or a member of the incumbent administration, but then they voted for people of Trump's opposition in down ballot races. There were people who voted for Tammy Baldwin, the Democratic senator of Wisconsin, but also voted for Trump. What the hell does that have to say about the mandate? And again, others have written about this as well. The Atlantic, former President Trump won a sweeping victory in the Electoral College. 4 years after executing multiple schemes to overthrow an election, he lost and seized power by force. And months after being convicted of state crimes in New York, he ran a race of slander and lies against immigrants and his political opponents, vowing to seize dictatorial powers in a campaign of vengeance. But he won. When all the votes are counted, he may have won the popular vote, but he may not have won the popular vote. And he almost certainly will. But again, as Lawrence O'Donnell points out, that by the time all the final votes are tabulated in California, it might be by a 1-point margin, right? Behind him are Republican Party apparatchiks who see the devotion of Trump's followers as a vehicle for their most extreme ideological schemes, including national bans on abortion, a mass deportation that could wreck the economy, and subject Americans of any immigration status to invasive state scrutiny and force, and an immense distribution of income upward. The Democrats' reward for steering the economy out of the post-pandemic economic crisis will be watching their opponent claim credit for the prosperity that their work created, an economy unencumbered by inflation and the high interest rates once needed to tame it. If Trump seems popular now, he'll likely be much more popular in a year. That's also something we got to talk about and keep talking about. Trump will claim a popular mandate for everything he does. He did that when he eked out a narrow electoral college victory in 2016, and he will do it now. But there is no constitutional mandate for authoritarianism. No matter what the Roberts Supreme Court says, the president is not a king, and he is not entitled to ignore the law to do whatever he pleases. Americans cannot vote themselves into a dictatorship any more than you as an individual can sell yourself into slavery. The restraints of the Constitution protect the American people from the unscrupulous designs of whatever lawless people might take the reins of their government. And that does not change simply because Trump believes that those restraints need not be respected by him. Now, again, these institutions are not self-enforcing. They are not divine. They require good faith actors to enforce it. But again, the principle is absolutely correct. And it goes back to, again, this idea of a mandate. Well, the popular vote, right? And it's really the voters that put Trump in office, just as they put President Biden in office. Donald Trump is not overwhelmingly popular. And you also think about, again, the headwinds at his back. The anti-incumbency advantage, the polling on the economy and the state of the country. And yes, he swept the 7 battleground states, but those are by margins of tens of thousands of votes. Meaning it's not like he won Pennsylvania by 1 million votes or 2 million votes. He swept the electoral college in those 7 states because of tens of thousands of votes. Again, not to diminish it. That's, he won, and he won fair and square. But this was not a Reagan or Obama era sweeping mandate or landslide victory. And that's really what Jessica Tarlov is pointing out, that there's a risk here that Donald Trump is going to overreach if he acts on his worst impulses and the most extreme iterations of his agenda, which he will almost certainly try to do. But there are going to be millions of people in this country going, well, that's not what I voted for. I voted for you to lower the cost of groceries. I didn't vote for you to deport 20 million Americans or to prosecute your political opponents. And there's going to be an election in 2 years, the midterm elections. And recent history, if recent history is any indication, the incumbent president will lose at least one of the 2 chambers, and will almost certainly be the House, not the Senate. Senate's going to be a challenge for a while. But I just thought it was a really interesting observation that Tarlov made, per her usual performance, right? And it's entirely possible that these victorious MAGA Republicans are being a bit too smug and are misrepresenting what their electoral victory actually means. But we'll see. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.